you have no idea what that leadership team or that leader or that CEO or that founder has sacrificed, and you are stabbing them in the back. Let's just be clear about it. It might be for the good. It might be putting somebody out of their misery. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it, but you are still fundamentally, to some extent, betraying their trust.
Welcome to the Startup CEO Succession podcast, where we dive deep into the pivotal journey of founder CEOs who face the critical decision. Should you continue leading your business or bring in a new leader? I'm your host, Evgeny Shadchnev. As a founder coach and author specializing in CEO succession, I interview founders, chief executives, and investors who share their stories of navigating this transition. Today, I'm speaking with Avin Rabheru, founder and CEO of Housekeep, the UK's largest marketplace of cleaners and tradespeople. Before founding Housekeep 10 years ago, Avin worked for 6 years as a venture capitalist with Smedvik Ventures. So today we discuss how investors see the process of CEO succession and what could prompt Avin to replace himself with a new professional chief executive. Enjoy the conversation. Good morning, Avin. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Pleasure. Nice to be here.
I'm looking forward to our conversation because you've got an interesting mix of experience. You were an investor and you've been a founder for the last decade. Can you share more about your professional experience with our listeners?
Yeah, sure. I've always had entrepreneurship running through my blood and through my fingers. Everybody in my family runs a business. And I was one of those kids aged 7 that would wash the next door neighbor's car to earn £3. And I was one of those kids at 11 that tried to make a magazine. And at 15, of course, inevitably, like all founders, tried to throw parties, partly to be cool and partly to make some cash. I always wanted to learn about business. So first job was in M&A, doing this sort of investment banking kind of job, then in strategy consulting for a few years. And then the bulk of my professional career, or structured professional career, I suppose my current job is professional too. And my structured professional career was in early stage growth capital investing. So a little bit late stage than venture capital, a little bit earlier stage than buyouts. So helping businesses through Series A, Series B phase. And that naturally led me back to what I always had a passion for, which is starting my own business. So as you say, about a decade ago, I started a business called Housekeep, which is the UK's biggest platform connecting households with tradespeople, primarily cleaners, plumbers, electricians, and so on. And I still do a little bit of investing and sit on a couple of boards as well alongside that role.
And I saw on LinkedIn yesterday that Housekeep won yet another award.
Yeah, it was a good one as well. I think we're possibly at 50 awards. We've won quite a few, which is nice. But yesterday, we won Market Disruptor of the Year, which is not the most catchy title for an award, but we won it anyway. But what I was particularly pleased about was it wasn't in the startup category or the small category, it was in the large category. And of course, winning an award in the large category is better than winning one in the small category. So we're quite pleased about that. So yeah, thanks.
Oh, well done. Your hard work is paying off. I would love to go deeper into your experience with and your views on CEO succession, because you've got 3 different angles. You were a professional venture capitalist before Housekeep. You've been running Housekeep as a founder, and 10 years is a long enough time to really start thinking about your own options as an entrepreneur. And you've been angel investing, therefore making decisions about what founders you invest in, their CEO potential, how you see their businesses grow. So I would love to go into all of this, but to kick it off, what makes conversations about CEO succession so difficult when it comes to founders and investors?
I guess the first point, the frame of the conversation in my mind, is this transition from founder to CEO is something that we're talking about when a business has found product market fit, once the economics of the model work. And we're talking about this professionalization of a business, kind of scaling up rather than starting up, I suppose. So I'm assuming when we're talking about founder to CEO, we're talking about a moment where there has been some success. To come back to your question, why is it difficult? I think you've got to put yourself in the position of who are people who are founders. So first of all, they're people who presumably can look up the odds and know that the odds are against them. your chances of being successful are extremely low. But nevertheless, people like me or people like you have said, the odds don't apply to me. I'm smarter, or I'm better, or I'm more capable. They already start from an angle of, hey, the odds don't apply to me. And then they've actually been successful. They've got to a point where they can think about bringing in a CEO. So not only do the odds not apply to them, they've proved that they can outperform the odds. And what kind of person's a founder? They probably have a vision. They probably have some dream. They're probably pretty good at sales. They're probably pretty good at selling something and telling a story to themselves and to everybody else. And so why is it difficult? Because the temperament of these kind of people is very unlikely to also be somebody who is deeply self-reflective and thinks, maybe I'm not the right guy to start this business, or I'm not the right guy to do this, right? They're just not temperamentally geared up to that. So I think that makes it pretty difficult. Now, I understand that lots of founders are plagued with self-doubt or fear or uncertainty, or they have tough days and they have low days. I'm not saying any of that's not true, but I think most founders that I know start with the assumption that they're really great. They don't say it in those terms, but they must do, because otherwise it wouldn't be a founder. And I don't think I've very often heard a founder say, I'm not capable of this. They often say, I don't want to do this, or I want to do something else, or I'm tired. But I think the nature of a founder means they're not the kind of person that says, I can't do this. And I think that makes the conversation difficult, because the things that make you successful can also now be the things that hold you back in the next phase.
So in a way, there is a contradiction between the level of self-belief and even delusion when it comes to
exactly
chances of success and your own capabilities when you are starting the business. But when it gets to maybe a good degree of product market fit a few years later, you need to be grounded and realistic to assess the situation from a completely different angle. And that's just two different perspectives.
Exactly. And I think, and I mean this, of course, in the most positive possible way, you have to be a little bit deluded to be a founder, because obviously the odds are against you. So yeah, and that obviously it's hard to one day decide that the odds actually do apply to you. That's a strange transition.
And what does prompt a founder to consider possibly replacing themselves with a professional scale-up CEO?
I'd say mostly, on balance, I'm not sure that they do. I think they get pushed, usually from an external investor. They might get nudged, or they might get genuinely pushed off a cliff, but I think they're often being nudged or pushed by investors, probably 2 and 3 times, I would say. And I think it's not a surprise that, actually, I'm going to pull some statistics out of thin air here, so it might be wrong, but I would assume that businesses with external investors are much more likely to replace the founders, the management team, than businesses that don't have external investors. Now, of course, you could draw a line there and say, well, actually, the reason for that is that the businesses that raise external capital are more ambitious, they're trying to grow faster. So I don't know if you can run that, but I think most of the time the founders aren't self-consciously saying, hey, I'm not the right person for the job. I think when it is coming from the founder, I think it's usually comes from a kind of, you need an enormous amount of grit. I think that's my favorite word to describe what founders really need. You need grit. You need to relentlessly move forward every single day, no matter how good it is, or no matter how bad it is. And that's difficult, because if you have a bad day, you've had a bad day, you've got a problem. And if you have a good day, you have to have the discipline to say, okay, I need to do better tomorrow. And that's tough. Every day you have to be getting better as a founder. And I think when founders take it on themselves to quit, I think they just have too many bad days. They just can't figure out this next hill. And that's when they start to say, I just can't do it anymore. They run out of steam, effectively, whether it's after a decade or after 5 years or after 15 years. And I think there's a particular patch, which is sort of more than 4 years and less than 10 years, where a lot of founders say, I don't think I can make it up this next hill, effectively. And perhaps we can talk about that a bit as we talk as well.
And what makes it, or what defines this patch? 4 years and 10 years. Why are these numbers significant?
The way I think about, and it's having seen a lot of much smaller businesses that are true startups, and also seen businesses scale up, I'm going to borrow actually from Piper Private Equity, who are a retail and consumer fund. And they talk about 7, 17, and 70. And it was originally something that was observed about multi-site retail, so restaurants or shops or so on. And that roughly 7 sites, 17 sites, or 70 sites, they felt like kind of changes in what's going on. And certainly for Housekeep, in revenue terms, we had a kind of stalling of the engine at about 7 million, and we had another stalling of the engine at about 17 million. Just we couldn't grow anymore. And what had happened at 7, basically, I was doing all of the jobs. So I would effectively oversee 10 to 15 people's work, almost literally checking everybody's work on everything. And you get quite far doing that. And you can man mark everybody in the pub. Nobody needs to do reviews. Everyone's young. Everyone knows exactly what you're doing. But we just I remember this moment, September 2017. We were already doing, I don't know, 10,000 jobs a month or something. I can't quite remember. And we got 40,000 phone calls. Like, what on earth what? Like, what does this even mean? Like, what? This doesn't make any sense. And we thought, hey, we need to bring in somebody who actually understands customer service rather than just, you realize it's a function that has emerged rather than just this, the early days someone picks up the phone. And at 7, we needed to bring in a couple of people who knew what they were doing, basically. Not loads, just a couple. And it's 17 million. The way I would describe what would happen is I would have hired 2 really bright, really motivated people who really cared about their work. And these 2 people there were more than 2, but in sets of 2. This set of 2 people would come to me and they say, hey, we went away and we thought about this problem. And we've done all this work and we've come up with this solution. And I'd be like, this is exactly the wrong thing to do. And it's like, how have I built an organization where I've got these bright, motivated people who are doing exactly the wrong thing on repeat all day? And people say things to you like, what's the strategy? You're like, well, the strategy is just to, kind of make it bigger. And suddenly you can't man mark anybody anymore. And so what I'm saying is these inflection points, and I think those inflection points in terms of can you get to the next scale, if you can't get through those barriers, you end up in this sort of circular, it's not working. And all your people are sad and irritable, and they think you're not a good boss. They don't say it to you in those words, but that's what they think. And you find that high quality team members move on. So whether that's at 4 years or 10 years or 7 million and 17 million, I think getting through those 2 parts where phase 1 is you do everything and phase 2 is you decision make and know about everything. Getting out of those 2 points is very difficult. And I think when founders get stuck in a loop, they get worn down, and that phase can take years. And that's when they start to say, I'm tired, because I'm tired of always having a bad day and I'm not getting the results on the other side that make it worth it.
So it sounds like the first inflection point is when the company gets big enough or complex enough that a senior level needs to be built. As you've said, you brought a couple of people with serious experience. And the second inflection point, when the company gets complex enough so that you don't even know about every single decision happening across the company, and you need to run it in a different way.
Yeah, you kind of almost move into a governance role, and your job is to make the organization more effective. Not to, again, there are lots of different phrasings of the similar problem, but job 1 is to build a product, job 2 is to build a business, job 3 is to build an organization culture. They're quite different things actually, and they don't. And no one sometimes people tell you, if you're fortunate enough to have a network of people who've been through it and who will literally tell you, by the way, what you're doing is you're going through X to Y. But most of the time it happens to you and you just know that you're having a bad day and you don't even know why.
So what you're describing is 3 stages. First, founders focus on building the product. Then they're focused on building the company that builds the product. And that's arguably when they first take their real seat as the CEO. And then the next inflection point, the next transition, the CEOs are focusing on building the culture once there is
Absolutely.
a machine, a mechanism that operates the
Yeah.
business.
Yeah. Absolutely right.
And you describe these inflection points in terms of revenue, 7 and 17. Do you see it in terms of the size of the team, or not really?
I think, that they're all, you could take years, you could take sites, you could take revenue, you could take team. For me, and life matters here. People have lives, right? They're outside of their job. For me, that first inflection point coincided with having our first child. And suddenly my ability to just always be in the office at 8 p.m., 9 p.m., have that serendipitous conversation with somebody who happened to be working late, give them a pat on the back, disappeared. Now, I don't know how much of this is, it was just live actually, but ignoring that for a second, putting that to one side. Phase one, I basically managed and man-marked everybody one-to-one, really. In other words, I knew everybody who worked in the office. They didn't need to know the strategy because they had so much time with me one-to-one. Even the most junior employee in a team of sort of 15, I think up to about 15 to 20 people, we would go to the pub on a Friday night, and between 9 p.m. and 11 p.m., the three most junior customer service staff would give me their long list of reasons that they were really pissed off about what was going on. And on Monday, we'd build some new stuff. And you could do that to kind of 15 people. Then up to about 50, you just can't do that anymore. Suddenly you're reliant on suddenly what typically happens is you start to rely on second or third hand information. You start to have managers tell you, so-and-so is doing well, so-and-so is not doing well. And you lose that sort of personal touch with people. And as a consequence, as you start to expand, you get into the position where two bright, motivated people can spend some time work on something and come up with completely the wrong answer. They don't know what the goal is. And you also, typically, I think, founders also don't really know what the goal is. They're like, well, I want to grow revenue, make loads of money as quickly as possible to make a thing that's really big, just make it good, better. It's quite hard. You're sort of slightly tripped over your own success because you work really hard to get it working, and it's like, oh, it does work. So now what? You've kind of got through the failure gate, because to some extent, succeeding is just not failing. So you've done that. But then what's success? Like how big is it going to be? Where is it going to operate? Is it going to be in every city? And of course, you get some founders that start with that vision and really stick to it. But I think most of the time, people are a bit surprised by their own success. They don't know what to do about it. Yeah. That obviously makes it difficult for people and organizations.
And this also makes me think of this shift from micromanaging everything in the beginning, almost inevitable and actually quite helpful, because the founder has their fingerprints all over the place, and that's helpful, but only up to a point. At some point, the founder needs to shift their attention to bigger strategic long-term questions. And that's a counterintuitive transition for many, because founders instinctively try to double down on what's been working. And that's only going to get in the way as the company keeps scaling.
Yeah. And I think an interesting, I don't, because obviously I'm a founder and obviously I believe, I'm amazing, obviously. I try not to say it out loud, but obviously I think that because I'm a founder. And all founders think this, by the way. They all think they're amazing and that they did everything and their team was just sort of there by coincidence. Obviously, I understand this is not true, but all founders secretly think this. An interesting counterexample to that I occasionally chew over is what would Housekeep be in a better position if I'd replaced myself 3 years ago? Possibly, yeah, maybe. There must be. I mean, I guess if you think about the question slightly differently, is it even possible that somebody could be better at my job than me? Well, the answer to that question is obviously yes. So obviously, if someone amazing had taken my job 3 years ago, then obviously they'd be better than me. So it's a kind of interesting. Obviously, it is possible that someone in a world with 7-8 billion people in it is possible that someone could do my job better than me, presumably. Even I don't have that much self-belief that there's literally nobody in the world who could do it better than me.
So it sounds like you have considered stepping down about 3 years ago, but decided against it. Was it a serious consideration?
There was no specific moment where I thought about stepping down. If I'm real about it, if I'm honest about it, there is zero chance I'm stepping down now or before. Zero chance. If I'm really honest about it. But I do try to ask myself what that would mean. What would somebody who's better than me do? And what would the benefits be? Because it's a way of learning, of trying to say, well, okay, let's imagine there must be someone better than me. What is it that they would come in and do? What kind of things would they do that I'm not doing? Because probably I should be trying to do those things. So I don't give real serious consideration to stepping down. I at least try, not successfully, to sort of introspectively figure out how can I be better? And that's a good way of asking that question. In the same way, asking the question, if I was to start Housekeep from scratch today, how would I do it? And to critically assess, on that basis, given the way technology and markets and so on have moved, are there opportunities that we're leaving on the table as a business? In the same way, I'm asking what are the opportunities for me as a CEO?
And this makes me think that all founders, or nearly all founders, even founders who are absolutely convinced that they should not step down, are asking themselves this question purely to assess what they're doing right, what they could be doing differently, what someone else could be doing, and just going through this scenario in their own mind, even if the outcome is to keep doing a good job.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah. And I'm curious, what was your thinking process like when you had your first child? Did you wonder whether you could maybe delegate a big chunk of your role to someone else, or replace yourself completely, or sell the business because suddenly your family life changed?
I think it's a good question. Having children 100% changes you. And so it must change you as a leader, and it must change your ambitions. What it did for me, it didn't change, I don't think. I still wanted to build a big business, and I hadn't done it yet. So I wanted to carry on. That part didn't change. I think having one and then a second child really focuses your time, because all decisions that I'm making about my time are basically trade-offs between doing something or spending time with my children. That's the thing that I have to make a decision on. And so with one child, I had quite a lot of time to continue making angel investments. I'd be pretty generous with my time. I'd have a cup of coffee with someone. I would do my best to help. I mean, if I have a cup of coffee with someone for 45 minutes, there's no business that's kind, but not a business benefit, I'm probably going to work an extra 30 minutes that day, and I'm going to be home 30 minutes later, and that's reducing time I spend, particularly with two children. It's time that's really tight. And so it really, really focuses your time. But my ability to work 100-hour weeks just diminished. I can't, unless I don't see my children at all, and I don't want to do that. That's not a trade-off I'm willing to make. So you can't work as much, but you're probably more focused when you do work. I don't know how that nets out. I suspect it nets out at a loss overall in terms of output, is my guess, if I'm honest. But, that's a trade-off that I'm sure that's okay. I guess the second thing, I'm not world-renowned for my patience or my subtlety. As again, I'm probably not uncommon in this, but apparently I can be quite direct and quite apparently a little bit blunt. I sometimes say that I'm going to write a management book called Management Through Sarcasm, which probably isn't the best reflection on me and my management style. But having kids does make you patient, because especially when they get to 2 or 3, it's just, if you say, which I say quite a lot, Anushka, please put your shoes on. There is no chance she's going to put her shoes on. But if you say, Anushka, I understand that you don't want to put your shoes on, but wouldn't it be nice to wear these shoes today, and tomorrow you can wear the wellies because it might rain tomorrow, and then afterwards we can see a cat. She's going to put her shoes on, or probably still put her wellies on. And how's that different to management? Hey, make that thing really good. Or I understand that you're finding it quite difficult to make that thing really good. I believe that you can achieve this. I think you have great potential. There are some similarities, I think, between management and children, I suspect.
Yep, it sounds like we keep on learning with every passing year, even as adults. Yeah. And when you think about the future, Housekeep has been going strong for 10 years. What are possible inflection points in the future where you would possibly seriously consider bringing in a professional CEO?
I would like to believe, but let's be honest, it's probably not true this, but I'd like to believe that at any point, if I thought there was somebody more competent out there who was hireable, I would replace myself. But in practice, I don't know if that's true, but I would like to believe that. The way I think about, I would consider my journey complete, to consider it acceptable for me to leave, would be when Housekeep and Avin are no longer intertwined entities. So they're separable entities. So I want to be replaceable, even if I am not replaced. And I think having an exit where you leave the business is a sort of symptom of that. And the most probable way of achieving that, or symbolically proving that was true. I work very hard when I'm working still, even with the kids and all the other things in life. But I also take a good amount of holiday a year. That's my trade-off. I would rather be on and then off. And the way I would describe Housekeep today is if I go away on a holiday, everything's fine. If I go away for 4 weeks, 5 weeks, everything's fine. When I come back, the business will be a little bit bigger. The business will even grow without me. But when I come back, everyone will say, I'm glad you're back. Because I've not yet truly built an organization that can independently execute the strategy. It needs me to join the dots together. It's still a bit me, not just Housekeep. But I think it is plausible that in a couple of years that I could go away on holiday and the strategy and the organization would have evolved independently without me. And then I think I would say, yeah, I'm replaceable. I have built a thing that is independent of me. That's how I think about it, even if it's hard to put that in concrete terms.
Evan, I think there are two closely related questions here. One thing you are talking about is the role of a leader. You built an organization that can function and even grow for 4 or 5 weeks when the leader is on holiday, and the organization still feels like, okay, great that you are back, because an organization needs someone to lead. But a different or slightly different question is whether this leader has to be the founder. So I'm curious, how do you see what you uniquely bring to the table as the founder versus you doing the leadership job that another competent CEO could be doing?
It's a good question. I guess there are business principles that I don't believe are fully embedded into the organization. I think if you take what Housekeep does in its core first business vertical of recurring cleaning, we act as a marketplace, there is demand and supply, we match it up and we price it. But in particular, we scope and therefore we can price and therefore we can automate jobs online. In other words, we figure out that you, the consumer, want 2 hours of cleaning. The consumer is willing to pay this price. The cleaner is willing to do it at this price. And because we know that, we can automate everything because we know where you're willing to work and when you're willing to have the job, etc. So we can scope and price and automate jobs. But as we go into other verticals, should we, for example, in a plumbing vertical, are we fixing a leaky tap or are we selling an hour of a plumber's time? Or is it a half an hour with a call out fee? Why don't we do, if someone asks us to put up a fence for £10,000, why don't we do that? Everyone kind of knows that we don't do that. But what if loads of people want fences put up? And I think kind of that you can have a strategy and you can have a organization, but actually how decisions are made, what's in scope and what's out of scope, I think is primarily what a founder does. Now, I think you could keep taking this to its extreme. Obviously, a competent CEO could do that too. But I think the codification of what are we trying to do, what's the purpose, what's the vision, what's in scope, what's out of scope, that's the founder's job. I agree that a competent CEO could do that too. But obviously you get earlier and earlier, like what do we sell? What do we price it at? What are suppliers like? Is it companies? Is it individuals? Is it 2-person teams? Is it 1-person teams? Those things strike me as a founder's job. But I agree, you could it's not a black and white, it's a grayscale, I think.
Yeah, but it's definitely a gradient from, it's
Yeah.
definitely a founder in year 1,
Exactly.
and it could be a professional CEO in year 20.
Precisely, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that brings me on, by the way, to something that I want to touch on. I don't know. I'm not sure if founder to CEO, that transition or that succession, I'm not convinced it's an independent, separate thing it's just your job to learn every day. In the same way that I didn't know anything about digital marketing, so I found out some stuff about digital marketing and I ran digital marketing for a bit, and then I hired somebody to look after digital marketing, and then I don't think about digital marketing anymore because there's a team of people who think about it who are more competent than me. I don't know if this transition is really distinct from all the other things that you need to learn. And certainly in my mind, a founder should move on when they are incapable or unwilling to continue learning. And this just strikes me as one of the many things that you need to learn. And it is difficult. I'm not saying it's easy. It's easier to learn about digital marketing than to figure out how to build an organization and culture. I accept that. But to me, there's a load of stuff you need to learn. This is just one of the things.
Yeah. And you're making a distinction between willing and able. Some founders are willing but not able. Some founders are able but they are willing to do something else. So both are important here.
Exactly. Yeah.
But there is another angle that you hinted at the very beginning of our conversation when you spoke about 2/3 of CEO transitions being started by the investors. The founder might be willing and able to learn, but maybe not as fast or as efficiently as the organization needs, or maybe someone else makes a judgment that the company could be growing even faster if someone else was doing the job.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's common.
And I'm curious, how did your perspective evolve as your career progressed from being an investor to being a founder yourself?
It's interesting. I think a lot of, including me, most investors say that we back exceptional teams. And I used to say this too, but I'm a bit skeptical about this on reflection. Most of the time, management teams get replaced. Certainly, the only time that I would observe that founding teams stayed in place is where they kind of got lucky. Everything went to plan. But I'm not sure that things went to plan because they were better than another team. It's just that in some markets, pandemics are pretty bad for business. In some markets, pandemics are pretty good for business, or whatever it might be. So the only time I saw founding teams stay together and be backed all the way was when everything went to plan. Or actually, if I reflect on it, probably the investors were in a minority position and couldn't push them out. In other words, a bit like me, I'm in a position where no one can push me out because no one can. They don't. Where investors do have control, where they do have the ability to change the team, or where anything has gone wrong, whether it's external or internal, I've seen the teams be replaced. I think this idea that investors back teams to the hilt is not true. And I think anybody raising capital should go into that eyes open. And I think we have to accept the vast majority of investors have not built businesses. And I'm not sure they completely understand how things work in the real world. And I say that critical of myself in my 20s as an investor too. All with the caveat that I'm not saying it's a bad outcome. I think you alluded to this earlier. It's entirely plausible to believe that actually the business ended up in a better position as a consequence. More jobs were created, more economic growth was created. But I'm not sure founders or founding teams know that that's what they're signing up to. As an angel investor, I'm not investing either the time or the inclination to change a team. So I really have to say, I'm not going to go and say, hey, by the way, I think you should, fire yourself and I'm going to go and help you find a CEO. I don't have the time or inclination to do that. It's not my job or place. So I really have to ask, do I think I would back this person to do the journey at least far enough to make it financially successful? So I feel like I'm much more truly focused on who is the team and would I back them?
And I love your honesty here, because I think the perspective you are taking is informed by your experience of being a professional venture capitalist, but it's not a perspective I imagine most actual VCs today would take, because effectively what you're saying is that if you do a really good job, we will probably try to replace you because of your success. And if you do a bad job, of course we will try to replace you because of your failure. So you'll need to get really lucky to stay in your position.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah. And what's your... I understand that it's a question worthy of another episode or even another podcast, but what's your sense of what makes a strong founder? How do you make the judgment when you meet someone for the first or second time?
I can tell you what I'm strongly convinced is the answer in one sentence. A strong founder can tell you obvious, counterintuitive things. And I'll explain that. So what we're looking for is learning. The greater the rate of learning of an individual, the more successful they will be, is what my argument is. And obviously, an early stage founder does not know very much. They don't have very much because they've only just started. So what are you going to possibly know in 6 months' time? When I raised capital, for a few years, when I first raised, I raised a couple of small rounds for Housekeep right at the start. And I thought people backed me because they'd worked with me before and they knew me and they trusted me. And those things might be somewhat true, but that isn't why they invested in me. They invested in me because I'd figured out an enormous amount of things in a very short space of time. In other words, I demonstrated a high rate of learning is what happened. And in particular, I'd figured out things. I was always a couple of steps ahead of people. So to give a really specific example, everybody I spoke to early on said, hey, Avin, you want to set up this business called Housekeep? It's going to have cleaners. You know who's really great at cleaning? Hotel cleaners, because I'm an investor, I've got quite a lot of money. I've stayed in a nice hotel. What you should do is you should stand outside the Dorchester Hotel in London. You should try and poach their cleaners. And sounds pretty sensible, right? As you've been to hotels look quite nice. But by this point, I'd spent a month, maybe 2 months cleaning, and spent a lot of time on buses sat next to a cleaner called Maria. And we tried to have 2-person cleaning teams. And Maria was a house cleaner and Andrea was a hotel cleaner. And they both seemed perfectly competent to me. But Maria really hated Andrea. And I just assumed that it was some weird dynamic between the two of them. They didn't get on. And Maria did speak great English. So it was particularly difficult to understand what she said. But I must have spent 10, 12 hours with her on a bus. And every now and then she'd tell me how Andrea was terrible at cleaning. And eventually I understood what she meant. What she meant was Andrea's very good at tidying, like in a hotel. You tidy things, you make them neat. But in a house, you might not clean a house for 2 whole weeks. So if you imagine a shower screen in a hotel, you just wipe it. If you've got a shower screen in a house, it's got limescale built up on it. So you have to spray some product on it. Then you have to scrub it, you have to wait. Then you have to scrub it. Then you have to dry it and polish it. Whereas in a hotel, you effectively just dry it and polish it and it'll be clean. And hotel cleaners are not trained to clean in depth. They're trained to tidy. And hotel cleaners actually can be converted to good house cleaners. But there's all sorts of things they don't know how to do, like access a property or be on time or travel through public transport or clean shower screens. They're very good at customer service. They're very good at making things look neat and tidy and making beds. But if you make the bed, but your bathroom's dirty, you're going to be unhappy as a customer. And I had like a myriad of these like weird and wonderful, really miscellaneous, detailed stories about the real world. And if a founder can't tell you, and it's really obvious, right? What I've said is not rocket science. It's not like I've, split the atom here. It's just that I hung out with cleaners and did a lot of cleaning and I figured it out over time. But that rate of learning, the ability to figure out things that are simple about their industry that nobody else knows, that's what you're looking for. So it's obvious when you're told, but it's counterintuitive. And I think you can you sit with a founder, and in 20 minutes, good founders will have told you 3 things that you're like, oh, that's really obvious, but I just never knew it. And that's like my one line. Obvious counterintuitive things demonstrates learning.
And this also makes me think of that famous Peter Thiel line about things that are contrarian but true. What do you believe in that most smart people disagree with you on?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And by the way, I find it really cool that you invested so much time and so much effort to really understand the minute details of what it's like to actually do this job, instead of, as I imagine, many founders would try to build such a business by sitting in front of an Excel, building projections and making assumptions. And in the process, making mistakes, like assuming that if 5-star hotel look nice, it must be because their cleaners are the best.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We're talking about founders and CEOs. CEOs do not clean 100 homes. They don't sit on a bus all day with cleaners. Whereas, my ass was on the line, frankly. If I couldn't figure it out, then I knew I should quit. And to some extent, I think about the founder to CEO transition in a similar way. If I couldn't figure out how to price it, if I couldn't figure out what the price in the market should be, I should have quit. If I couldn't figure out how to deliver high quality cleaning, I should quit. If I can't figure out how to build an organization, I should quit. They're similar things in my mind. They're just different phases of the journey.
Yeah. So the job of a founder is really to find answers to all these early stage questions. And then at some point, the job of a CEO is to run, scale, optimize, grow all of this. And it could be the same person, but sometimes it will not be.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And Avin, what advice would you give to founders who might be running organizations which are not at the seed stage anymore? So there is a degree of product market fit and there is a possibility to hand it over to someone else, but they don't have to. They have the choice of either running it for the next few years or trusting it to someone else. What would you like them to take away from this conversation?
That's a good question. I think I would encourage all founders to just keep going. If you're not under pressure, if you have time on your hands, if you don't have external investors pushing you or some other burning platform, keep going. Don't stress about it, and just realize that it's just another part of learning. In the same way that you learned about how operations work or supply chains work or digital marketing worked, or you hired your first person, and you're going to make mistakes, like when you hired bad people and you hired the wrong people. You hired people who are incompetent and you hired some people who are evil. Everyone's done it. Just try not to make the same mistake again, I think. And I feel like on average, founders give up ever so slightly too early, and they should keep going. Maybe give up is a bit of an uncharitable way of phrasing it. Maybe that's a bit unfair, but I'll try to say it in the most controversial, interesting way possible, if you see what I mean, even if I don't fully believe it. But I think founders think that this is some special thing that you have to give up on. But I don't think it is. It's no different to me learning about cleaners or me learning about customer service. It's just another thing you have to learn. I don't think it's outside of anybody's skill set, or some people, it's an unlearnable thing. Yeah, you don't know how to do the job. It's new. You don't realize that you have to do the new job. That makes it difficult. You may not be suited to it, but most people probably can figure it out. Most people can probably evolve themselves. So I would just say keep that grit, keep that relentless sort of desire to get a little bit better every day, with probably one appendix to that, which is it is very tough. I've had very difficult days, very low days. Life gets a lot better when you're not losing money. As soon as you know that you have infinite runway, life is a lot easier. But I think if a founder's mental state is really suffering, which I think is true for some people who give up at this stage, I think at the end of the day, it's also not that big a deal. It's not the only thing that matters in the world. It probably feels like it to you, but in practice, it's giving up is I think it's I've not done it, so I'm speaking out of turn here. I think it's worse than you think, but it's also completely more okay than you think is my sense of it.
Can I provide a slightly, well, maybe the second appendix here? A CEO transition inevitably takes time. It takes time to figure out who to look for and then find another person that will have a notice period and handover. So we're really talking about easily 1, if not 2 years here.
Yeah.
And at the same time, if the founder reaches the point when they feel like they've got no other choice but to step down, they might not have time to execute it. So just from the purposes of orchestrating the switch, it might make sense to start it when there is still room for maneuver. And I'm curious, how do you think about the length of the handover and the necessity to keep going until it's not possible anymore?
It's a great observation. And I suppose, in the spirit of learning, you're certainly teaching me here. I guess if you're being true about it, we should all founders should be building teams that can replace us. That's kind of what success is. It's to build something that's independent of you. As I talked about earlier, for me, success is when the thing is. And I take your point, all businesses need leadership, but I think when you want to decouple yourself from the organization, and so you should always be sort of succession planning. It's kind of part of the job, part of what success looks like, such that if you get to a point where you think you need to move on, there is a sort of leadership team or leader in place who can take your position. I guess with the weird caveat, the sort of slightly unhelpful caveat, that if you're the kind of person that is doing that, you're probably a really good CEO. And if you're the kind of person that isn't doing that, you're probably going to struggle as CEO. So kind of you're in a weird unwinding effect. If you've done all the planning and all the thinking and you're prepped for 2 years out, you're probably a great CEO anyway. You don't need to move on. And if you haven't, you've not got a succession team. You also, business is completely reliant on you. You've got a doom loop here and a flywheel over here, unfortunately. Maybe that's why, I guess now you've got me thinking aloud, is maybe that's why I said it's worse than you think. Because when it happened, it's always a bit of a train crash, to be honest. It's never smooth, like never. And you have to accept that. And that's why I'm saying it is going to be bad, but it also is going to be okay. Everything's going to be fine on the other side as well.
Yeah. But you're making an interesting point here that if a person is capable of orchestrating an orderly transition that takes 1 or 2 years, they probably have the skills to keep doing their job.
Yeah.
And maybe they need a holiday, maybe they need some other change, but they are fundamentally capable. And if they are not capable and need to be replaced, then maybe they will not be able to orchestrate this transition, and we just need to accept that it's going to be a train crash. We need to take it as a chin as the company and then do our best in a difficult situation.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Avin, as we're preparing to start wrapping up, is there anything else that you would like to share with our listeners on the topic?
I guess one of the things I would touch on is the other side of this. So what about the people coming in, the CEO or leadership team coming in? And I think I've got a couple of observations for other parties who are often involved in this transition. The first is the incoming CEO or leadership team, and the second is the investors. And I think I've got a couple of thoughts on this. I have seen professional CEOs come in and absolutely transform a business for the better many times. And almost always what they do is they bring in a trusted 2 or 3 other senior people, and they replace not just the CEO, but also 3 or 4 other people. And I think that's been right. So I think if you're a professional CEO coming in, you've just got to accept that somebody with fresh eyes is going to look at anybody's leadership team and say there are 3 or 5 people who are really bright, who are underutilized, and the 3 or 5 people who I don't want on the next phase of the journey for whatever reason. That's going to happen. So whilst it's a CEO level change we're talking about, it's really a leadership change across the business is what's going to happen. And it probably should happen. It's the right thing to do. It gets better results for everyone. And then the other side is on the investor side of the table. And, maybe partly talking to myself as a, mid-20s, late 20s investor, I think we've got to be honest. You have no idea what that leadership team or that leader or that CEO or that founder has sacrificed, and you are stabbing them in the back. Let's just be clear about it. It might be for the good. It might be putting somebody out of their misery who's been miserable for years and is having a horrible day every day. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it, but you are still fundamentally, to some extent, betraying their trust. And what I would suggest in that instance, which doesn't happen enough, but I think should happen, is you should be generous with cash, not with equity, not with options, not with ownership. But if you pay somebody a bit more money, or you give them a bit more time, or you give them an elegant off-ramp, or whatever it might be, the money doesn't matter. It might really matter to that person. You can afford to be generous, because if the business fails, it's not going to fail because you gave somebody an extra 50 grand or 100 grand. If the business is successful, it's going to make no difference whatsoever. And so that would be my advice to the investor side of the table, which is do this in an elegant way, and in life be generous to a fault if you can.
And I make exactly this point in my book on CEO succession, because the amount of money involved in this situation can be very material for the founder who probably doesn't have the next job lined up, who is probably in the middle of a burnout or some other difficult situation.
Exactly.
But for the company, it's not going to be a material amount, but it can really facilitate the transition. So offering financial safety in the form of a settlement agreement,
100%.
buyback or something else can be a really wise move.
Yeah, and to get slightly into the weeds, there are tax advantages to different ways of structuring it. Like, why do you not do that? If you can afford to be generous, you should be.
Yeah, indeed. Sounds like a wonderful point to wrap up our conversation today.
Yeah.
Avin, thank you so much. I learned a lot from you. Really enjoyed the conversation, and I'm sure it will be useful to many other founders out there.
Likewise, I really enjoyed chatting.
To wrap up our conversation today, I would like to reflect on a couple of points that Avin made in this episode. The first one is the 2 inflection points that he named. First, the founder builds the product, then the business, then the organization and the culture. And these 3 stages are quite distinct, and the transition between them can be counterintuitive. This is when founders tend to struggle without really understanding what's going on or why every single day is so difficult. But in a way, these 3 stages of the job are just 3 different jobs. First, we focus on building a product that works, then we make sure that it makes money and there is a business, and then we scale and optimize and build an organization and focus on the right culture, and so on and so forth. And in a way, the job of a founder is just to keep learning, whatever the task is, whatever stage of the business. And as long as the founder is able and willing to keep learning, they are probably quite well positioned to continue as a CEO. And so, as a coach who has spoken to quite a few founders about possibly stepping down, those who chose to step down and those who chose to stay, I agree. in so many cases, when things are difficult, the right thing to do is just to keep going, because the reason things feel difficult is not because there is anything wrong with the job or with the founder or CEO, but purely because it is genuinely hard to keep learning all the time. I hope you found this conversation helpful. Please don't forget to like and subscribe and share this episode with your friends, and see you soon.